All right, let's dive right into this fascinating explainer of Robinson Beckett's philosophy on continuous reinvention. We're going to explore why uncertainty is actually a feature, not bug, of a truly fulfilling life. You know, if you've ever felt like you're just constantly starting over, or like the ground is always shifting beneath your feet, this is absolutely going to reframe everything you thought you knew about success and identity.
So here's the crucial point we really need to start with. We have to challenge this deep-seated craving we all have for a fixed, permanent identity. I mean, we spend so much energy trying to protect who we are, right? Building these massive walls of stability around our careers and our self-image. But Beckett sets the stage here for what he calls the paradox of true stability. Think about it. What if trying to stay exactly the same is actually the very thing making you so fragile?
Okay, moving right into Section 1, the Phoenix Principle.
To really wrap our heads around this principle, we have to look at how Beckett lived it. He didn't just learn this in some classroom. He literally constantly reset his own life. The guy left home and was hitchhiking by age 14, eventually navigating the foster care system. And he proved to himself very early on that surviving the fire is exactly what makes us adaptable. We are not these fixed, rigid creatures. We are deeply, fundamentally renewable.
Think about the difference between a cosmetic change and a real transformation. It's so easy to just, get a new haircut or switch jobs, all while remaining the exact same person underneath. But as Beckett learned while standing in the literal ashes of his own failed businesses and relationships, real transformation is, it's far more violent. It requires profound uncertainty. The old identity completely has to die before the new one can even begin to exist.
And this actually brings us to a really profound question about action. Because that space in between, the gap between who you were and who you're becoming, it is completely terrifying. When you're rebuilding from absolute zero and you don't yet know who you're going to be, patience is definitely not what saves you. Action is.
Which leads us perfectly to Section 2. Movement creates opportunity.
I want to share this absolutely incredible cycle from Beckett's own life. While living in Germany, he stumbled upon an abandoned Coca-Cola factory. Most people just see an empty building, right? But he saw what it wanted to become. So he walks into the manager's office and pitches this massive 3-day international music festival. The catch, he had 0 bands, no money, and no actual plan. He literally sat at a typewriter and invented fictional European band names just to secure the venue contract. But here's the magic of it. Once he had that venue, he used the momentum to get a sound company to sponsor it, then a beer company, and eventually, real bands actually signed on, and tens of thousands of people showed up. He completely proved that certainty rarely comes before action.
So the big takeaway here, if you just sit around waiting for total certainty, you're going to stay frozen. Opportunity doesn't just magically appear to lucky people. It behaves a lot like a psychological muscle that you have to exercise through motion. You just have to start walking before the path fully reveals itself.
Let's talk about the practical application of that movement. Beckett was heavily inspired by his dad's advice, which was basically, if you need a job, apply to 10 places every single day, or just walk in and work for free until you force them to hire you. Movement creates results. He also learned this while hitchhiking with hobos in Flagstaff, Arizona. He discovered they had actually mapped out these complex invisible train yard symbols across the entire country. It taught him that the underbelly of society is highly organized. Every single system has hidden opportunities, just waiting for those who train themselves to see the patterns.
But hey, before we just try to force ourselves to change through sheer willpower alone, we really need to ask a vital question about the spaces we occupy. Like, are we struggling because we're weak, or are we just in the wrong room?
And that brings us to Section 3, Architecture and Human Resonance.
This concept right here explains so much. It explains why a seriously talented person can just completely fail in a hostile environment, but then effortlessly thrive in a supportive one. We're adaptive systems, not fixed machines. We literally synchronize to the emotional frequencies around us. If you're in a room full of cynicism, you're going to contract. But if you're in a room full of curiosity, you'll expand.
The coolest part is that you can actually engineer this kind of resonance. Beckett was trying to help local artists get exposure in San Francisco cafes, and he noticed a major point of friction. Cafe walls were getting destroyed by artists hanging their paintings improperly. So, drawing on his construction background, he offered to professionally repair all their drywall damage for free, if they let him install a dedicated rotating art display system. He ended up connecting 12 artists and 12 cafes into this massive, shared ecosystem, all by simply solving environmental friction.
This idea ties directly into a crazy experience Beckett had at a Gothic club in San Francisco called Bondage A Go-Go. The club was this immersive, carefully crafted psychological theater. Well, one night, a guy walks in wearing a bright pink jogging suit. Just his mere presence completely disrupted the entire emotional frequency of the room. It really proved how fragile, yet incredibly powerful, collective atmosphere really is.
So, let's break down the practical takeaways. When Beckett lived in the Arts Building, which was this artist collective in Santa Ana, he was naturally pretty shy, so he didn't talk much. And you know what happens? That silence created projection. People just assumed he was arrogant. It wasn't until he finally stepped up to help everyone navigate these confusing city business licenses that the frequency shifted and they trusted him. The point is, whether it's an artist collective or a corporate office, you've got to stop trying to fix yourself if you're trapped in an environment fundamentally designed to suppress your nature. You might not be broken, you might just be misaligned.
This leads us perfectly into our next question. Once you're moving and you've found the right room, how do we transition from just surviving to actually expanding and scaling our impact?
Let's dive into Section 4, Leverage and Invisible Economies. Here is the harsh truth. Hard work scales incredibly poorly. Beckett learned this the hard way, doing drywall repair. His boss, a guy named Delbert Reynolds, essentially forced Beckett to buy his son's pickup truck by deducting $100 from every paycheck. But it totally backfired on the boss. Having that truck instantly gave Beckett mobility. It meant he could haul his own materials and take on bigger, independent jobs. That truck was pure leverage. It shifted him from just earning survival to creating expansion, letting him command higher rates and eventually start his own highly successful business.
Now, we all know the visible economy, right? Cash, contracts, credit scores. But Beckett lived by an invisible economy. Years ago, he gave his entire paycheck to a young model who was stranded in Pittsburgh just so she could get by while her bank funds cleared. He expected absolutely nothing in return. Well, a year later, she tracked him down and bought him an airline ticket to Munich, which completely changed the entire trajectory of his life. You literally cannot measure that on a spreadsheet.
When you really compare the two, you see that while the visible economy relies on contracts and assets, the invisible economy runs entirely on trust. And Beckett defines trust not just as basic honesty, but as emotional coherence over time. When people know that your words, your actions, and your intentions consistently align, that coherence accelerates action faster than any formal contract ever could.
All right, wrapping things up with Section 5, the illusion of arrival.
Think about the Taoist concept of Wu Wei. Wisdom isn't about just applying blunt force and dominating your circumstances. It's about navigating the currents of life without all that unnecessary resistance. Think of a feather in the wind. It might look chaotic from the outside, but it's actually responding perfectly to invisible forces. It's about alignment, not domination. This is such a beautiful contrast to the flawed goals society feeds us. We're taught to treat life like a ladder, that one day we're going to reach the top, the uncertainty will just vanish, and we will finally arrive. But there is no permanent state of completion. Life is an ocean. The water constantly changes form, from ice to steam to rain, but it's always water. Beckett uses this great German word, fertig, meaning you are finished with one phase, absolutely, but you are immediately ready for the next.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a really provocative thought to chew on. If identity is truly fluid, and if you are meant to continuously reinvent yourself through the Phoenix Principle, what fire do you need to walk through right now to discover the next version of yourself?